We begin today the Gemara at the Mishnah towards the bottom of Lamed Hey Amid Beis. Sagt the Mishnah Shachtoi, the Kayin shechted the carbon al menas lahaniach es damai, and he's thinking that the blood that's supposed to be sprayed on the mizbeach, he's just going to leave it. He's going to leave it for tomorrow and not spray it. Or a murav l'machar, or he's going to leave the parts of the carbon that have to be burnt on the mizbeach. He's going to leave it and not do anything with it. Oy lo itzian l'chutz. Or he thinks that he's going to take it outside and just leave it there. He's not going to spray it anywhere or do anything with it outside. Just leave it. Rabbi Yehuda paisel. Rabbi Yehuda says this kind of machshava pasels the carbon. Now this is very different than what we learned until here. Until here we learned that the person is thinking that I'm going to spray it tomorrow on the mizbeach. That's called chutz l'zmanai. Or I'm going to spray it somewhere else outside of its place. That's called chutz l'mekaymai. But over here, he's not thinking that he's going to do anything with it outside or outside of its time. Just leave it. Still, Rabbi Yehuda says that it'll be puzzle. The Gemara will bring the source for this psul where Rabbi Yehuda took this from. The Chachamim machshirin. However, Chachamim say that the carbon in this case remains kosher. It doesn't fall into the category of a machshava that he's going to do an aveda chutz l'zmanai or chutz l'mekaymai. You learn, as we learned before, the halacha of the psul comes from the pasuk where it says in he'ochel ya'ochel, and then the pasuk you see it speaks about whether it's done out of its time, out of its place. There has to be a machshava in relation to the achila of the person or the achila of the mizbeach, which would be spraying the blood out of its time or being makter out of its time. But over here, it's just to leave it. And that's not included in that psul, so therefore it's kosher. If the person that shechted the carbon had the thought that he's going to spray the blood in its wrong place, on the ramp of the mizbeach, or shalei keneged yisai, or on the mizbeach, but not where there is a foundation on the mizbeach. It also doesn't qualify. It's not the right place in the mizbeach. Or blood that's supposed to be sprayed on the top half of the mizbeach, he thought that he's going to do it on the bottom half. Or what's supposed to be sprayed on the bottom half will spray on the top half of the mizbeach. Or the blood that's supposed to be sprayed on the inside mizbeach, it'll be done on the outside mizbeach. Or the opposite, the blood that's supposed to be sprayed outside will be sprayed inside. Or another case, he's thinking that that this carbon will be eaten by impure people. That ones that are impure will be makriv the carbon. This does not refer to spraying the blood. It refers to bringing the parts of the carbon onto the mizbeach, and that does not passel the carbon. Ones that are arelim, they don't have a bris, they'll eat from the carbon. That is also not allowed. Or the ones that are arelim will be makriv the parts in the mizbeach. Or regarding a carbon pesach, so the one that shechted thought that lishbar atzamis ha-pesach, that when you eat from this carbon, it'll be eaten being over on the lav, breaking the bones of the carbon pesach, which is ve'etzem le'sishberu, you're not allowed to break a bone of the carbon pesach. Lechol emenu na, to eat from the carbon pesach when it's not fully roasted. V'la'arev damai b'dam apsulim, or the blood will be mixed with other bloods that are pasul, and then you can't spray it on the mizbeach. In all of these cases, if you had this kind of thought when you were shechting the carbon, kosher. The carbon remains kosher because she'ein machshava peseles, a thought of psul will not passel the carbon, ela b'chutz l'zmanai, b'chutz l'mekaymai, unless it's a machshava that the person that's doing the aveda of shchita or one of the other important avedas in the beginning, where he's thinking that he's going to eat or spray the blood or be makra on the mizbeach out of its time, or v'chutz l'mekaymai, or out of its place. But none of these kinds of machshavas of psul that you have when you shecht or do the aveda will cause the carbon to be pasul. Or one more case that we learned already in the beginning of the Masechta, a machshava that will pasul a carbon, v'ha-pesach v'ha-chatos shaloi lishman. By the carbon pesach and the chatos, if it's shecht shaloi lishma, for example, you shecht the pesach and you're thinking that it's for the sake of a shlomim, then that also will pasul the carbon, as the Gemara learned out in the beginning of the Masechta.
But it gives a klal over here that says,
yeah. Correct.
At the beginning of the Mishnah,
it brought a machlokes. Yeah. The Gemara will address this. Simply, this lashon of she'ein, this reason that it gives here, is the Chachamim speaking. Chachamim hold this rule that the only machshava that passes is chutz l'zmanai and chutz l'mekaymai. Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw, doesn't hold to this rule. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if you have a machshava that you're just going to leave it, that will also passel. But as the Gemara will explain, that this whole list of all the different kinds of psulim that it says it, that if you have the machshava for any of them, the carbon will still be kosher. This still remains true according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if this reason that it says here is not exactly accurate according to Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda will agree to this. And the Gemara will explain why. We'll see everything. Let's see. No, it's not. It's not considered to be chutzum kaimai, because it's also on the Mizbeach. Anywhere in the Mizbeach, the Gemara will address everything. Let's see. So the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what is the source of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that the person shechting the carbon had the machshava that he's going to leave the blood? Leave it till tomorrow and not do anything with it. That is a machshava that passes the carbon. Where do you see this? In the pasuk. In the pasuk it says chutz l'zmani and chutz l'mekaymai. Amar Rabbi Lazar, says Rabbi Lazar, trei kroi ksivi ben noisar. Regarding the isser of noisar, not to leave the carbon past its time, there are two psukim. Kasav echadoim, one pasuk it says by the carbon pesach loisisiru mimenu ad boiker. Do not leave it over until the morning, because the carbon pesach you could only eat that night. Kasav echadoim. But there's another pasuk by the carbon taida. It says lo yaniach mimenu ad boiker. Do not leave it until the morning. Second pasuk. So now, why does it have to say again this concept not to leave over the carbon beyond its time? So if you don't need this pasuk to teach me about leaving it over beyond its time, because I already see it from what the pasuk says by the carbon pesach, so what you learn from here is not the isser of neiser itself, but rather the machshava. If a person, when he's shechting, has the thought that he's going to leave it, that he's going to leave it beyond its time, that will passel the carbon. That's the source. So lo yaniach here means not to even think about leaving it beyond its time. It will passel the carbon. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says this. Can you say that according to Rabbi Yehuda we switch the simple pshat of the pasuk, and this pasuk is coming to teach me this concept of the machshava, and not, as the pasuk simply is saying, that you should not leave it beyond its time? But this pasuk is coming to teach about the din of noiser itself, as we see this in the Braisa. So the Braisa quotes the beginning of that pasuk. It says Upsar Zevach Toides Shlomov, and then the pasuk concludes there that Le'yaniach Mimenu Ad Boiker. So what is this pasuk coming to teach? So the simple pshat of the pasuk is Lamadnu L'Toidosh Necheles L'Yom V'Layla. It's coming to say regarding the carbon taida that you can eat it for that day that it was brought and for the night after. Because it says ad baika, that until the morning you should not leave it, so you can only eat it for a day and the following night. Now, that's only regarding the taida. Now, the pasuk here uses terminology that shows that there's more included in this pasuk, because it doesn't just simply say taida le'yaniach mimenu ad baika. It says bisar, Zevach, Taidas, Shlomov, B'yom Korbanot. There's many different terminologies in this pasuk that is showing that you have to add more here to teach regarding other korbanos as well, that you can't eat it beyond that day and the following night. What are the additional things that we add here? So the Braisa says Chalifin, if there's an exchange for this carbon taida, that's in the case where a person designated this carbon taida, then it got lost, and then he brought a second one instead of it, and now you find the first one, so now you have two. And you're bringing the second one as well. That's what's called Chalife Taida, and it's also brought in the Mizbeach as a carbon. Or Vladais, if the carbon Taida gave birth, so now you have the Vlad of the Taida. Or Tmurais, by a case of a Tmura, where a person says, I'm exchanging this for the another one. What happens is that the original one remains holy and a carbon, and the second one also becomes a carbon, and that's also brought as a carbon. So Rashi brings the source of the Gemara in B'chayris, that the Tmura, the Vladais, it's also brought as a carbon. So Minayin, how do I know when these are brought as a carbon that it also is eaten only that day and the following night? Talmud Loimar ubisar. The extra word ubisar adds these cases as well. Now, chatos v'osham minayin, regarding a chatos and a osham, a different kind of carbon, that you could also eat it only that day and the following night. How do I know that this applies for them? Talmud Loimar zevach. Because it says here the word zevach, an extra word, it means to include another kind of carbon, chatas and the osham. How do I know to include that the carbon shlomim that a nazir brings, that is actually similar in a way to the carbon toida, as Rashi says, because you bring breads together with this carbon. How do I know to include it as well? And also v'shalmei Pesach, the shlomim that's brought together with the Pesach. This is actually also called the chagiga, a carbon chagiga that's brought out of Pesach together with the carbon Pesach. That this you could eat only for that day and the following night, and not beyond that. So as Rashi here says, we're only being marbeh these kinds of shlomim, but not a regular shlomim. A regular shlomim, it clearly says in the pasuk that you could eat it 2 days and a night, like by kachim kalim or by the shlomim, 2 days and a night. But over here, these kinds of shlomim, how do I know that you could eat it only for 1 day and a night? Talmud loymar shlomov. So over here, it doesn't only say toidas, but it says toidas shlomov. That word shlomov is coming to add these. Lachmei toida v'chalais rikikim shebenazer benayin. The breads of the toida and the chalais and the rikikim, which is similar to a matzah, that's brought together with the carbon of a nazar. How do I know also that that's eaten for the day and only the following night? Talmud loymar karbonai. The extra word karbonai adds them as well. And kulon, regarding all of them, koira ani bahen, I apply what the pasuk goes on to say, loy aniach, that it should not be left beyond that night. In Cain, so this is the conclusion of the Gemara's question. So I see that in this price it's clearly saying that lo yaniach is not talking about the machshava that one may have when he's shechting the carbon not to eat it, or not to leave it, that is, but it's talking about the halacha of Neiser itself as it applies to all these cases. Says the Gemara, in Cain, but if that's the drasha of this pasuk, the pasuk should have used the term of loisei siru, not to leave it over, to make it nicer, as it usually does, regarding the inyan of nicer. My loy yaniach. Why does the pasuk switch the terminology and it says this lashon of not to leave it, loy yaniach? So that switch of the language, I say, if I don't need this switch of language to teach regarding the din of nicer, when you're actually leaving it over beyond its time, beyond that night, the switch of the language teaches me that there's an additional point there, that if the kohen thinks when he's shechting that he's going to leave it, that will passel the carbon as well. If this is the source, that's a source that the kohen is thinking that he's going to leave it until tomorrow. But the Mishnah also says that Rabbi Yehuda said another point. If the kohen thinks to himself not about leaving it until tomorrow, he thinks that he's going to take it out from the place where it's supposed to be. He's not going to spray it outside the blood. He's not going to be mocked it outside. I'm going to take it out from its place. Where do you see in the lashon of the pasuk lehon niach, which just means to leave it over until tomorrow? You don't see it includes also this machshava of lahaitzi that it would pass from the carbon. Another question here is, you're telling me that the source of Rabbi Yehuda is from this pasuk, lo yaniyach. But we know that time that Rabbi Yehuda's svarahu. Rabbi Yehuda's source was actually just from a svara. Logically, he said this, as we learned in a brayse. The Tanya brayse says, "Amalem Rabbi Yehuda." Rabbi Yehuda said to the Chachamim, "Do you not agree to me sheminiach lemachar shu pasal, that the blood of the carbon or the pieces of the carbon, if you just left it until tomorrow, that will passel the carbon? Meaning, if he actually left it until tomorrow, so then the carbon becomes passel. If so, av chishev lanichil lemachar passel." Rabbi Yehuda says, if you do it, actually, it passels the carbon. If you have the thought when you're shechting to do this, which will passel, that thought also passels the carbon. That's the rule. A machshava, to do something that would passel, that kind of machshava is able to passel the carbon. That's the svara of Rabbi Yehuda. It's interesting. It's without any source of a pasuk. There's a discussion in Mefarshim about this, but that's his klal, that's his rule. Any machshava to do something that would passel the carbon, if you do it, the machshava itself passels the carbon. So therefore the Gemara concludes, Ella taimet that Rabbi Yehuda svarahu. The source of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion here is just this logical idea. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, based on that, if this is so, v'nifloig nami Rabbi Yehuda bekulu. So why wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda argue regarding all of the other cases that are mentioned afterwards in the Mishnah? The Mishnah goes on to give a whole list of cases where a person has a machshava to do all these things that are not supposed to be done with the carbon, and there it doesn't seem like Rabbi Yehuda is arguing. Why wouldn't Rabbi Yehuda argue regarding all the other cases of the Mishnah that since he has a machshava to do something with the carbon which is passel, so then the machshava itself should passel the carbon? So the Gemara now will go through the entire list and explain why Rabbi Yehuda does not argue in any of those cases. It says the Gemara behind nifloig, in which case should he argue? It starts with the more. It doesn't go in the order mamish of the cases, but it starts with a simple one. B'shover atzamais. If the one that's shechting the carbon thinks that the carbon Pesach, he will eat it and break a bone that you're not allowed when you eat the carbon Pesach. Again, b'shevet atzamis ha-Pesach, or v'lechol mimenu no, or he's going to eat the carbon Pesach when it's not fully cooked or not fully roasted. That's not going to be a psul in the carbon. Zivche gufe mi mifsal. Is the carbon itself pasul when a person does this? He's over on a lav, he's not eating it properly. But the carbon itself, the carbon Pesach itself is completely kosher. So the rule of Rabbi Yehuda that a thought to pasul the carbon will pasul it does not apply here. The carbon remains kosher when you do this. Another case, if the person was thinking on manas sheyechlu tmeim, that I'm shechting this carbon and people that are impure are going to eat from it, or v'shakrivu tmeim, ones that are tamei will be makriv on the mizbeach. Zivcha gufe mi mifsal? Does the carbon itself become pasul through this? You're not allowed to have someone tamei eat from it, or be makriv the pieces on the mizbeach, but the carbon itself does not become pasul if it was done. And the same with the other case. Sheichlu areilim, shekrivu areilim. One without a bris will eat or will be makriv on the mizbeach. Zivche gufe mi mifsal. Does the carbon itself become pasul through this? So therefore, this kind of thought will not pasul the carbon either. Lishnachrine, another version to explain why in these cases, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it will not pasul the carbon, because kol kimine, is this person have the power to see to it that this will happen? What the Gemara is saying is, he's thinking of machshava that someone that's tamei is going to be makriv the carbon, or someone that's tamei is going to eat it. That's relying on someone else that would do that. Do you have the power to see to it that other person which is tamei is going to do this? When you're speaking about leaving the blood, you're going to put the blood away, you're going to leave it, and that no one's going to be makriv it. That's a thought that you have to do something which would be a psul in the carbon that you could do. But if you're here saying that someone that's tamei that's going to eat it, that's not something that's in your hands, b'chlal. Therefore, that kind of a psul, when you have the thought of a psul that could happen, that's not in your hands, that does not pasul the carbon, according to Rabbi Yehuda.
But if these people touch the korban, what happens?
Yeah, it doesn't pasul the carbon.
Doesn't pasul it.
No.
Even if they touch it.
Correct. They're over on a lav, maybe. Person that's pasul, that's tamei, is over a lav if he touches it, and he's even chayiv kadis if he eats from it, but it doesn't pasul the carbon itself. Just to clarify regarding the point that the Gemara says here, this is not a general concept that if you have a machshava for something to pasul the carbon which is not in your hands, it won't pasul the carbon. That's not a general concept. Regarding shaloi bizmano and shaloi b'mkaimi, it does work that way. If you think that someone is going to go ahead and spray the blood out of its time, that's not in your hands either. But over there, it does pasul the carbon, because that's mufurish in the pasuk. That's the machshava of pigul that passes the carbon. This kind of psul that Rabbi Yehuda added, misvara, that a psul, that a machshava for psul passes the carbon, it has to be a stronger psul, something that you yourself could do. Then it'll pass the carbon, according to this Lishna Achrina of the Gemara. Okay, the Gemara goes on now to other cases that were mentioned here in the Mishnah. La'arev damam v'dam psulim, the case where the person is thinking that the blood will be mixed with other bloods that are pasul, so that l'chayda should pasul the carbon. Now you can't spray it on the mizbeach, so it passes the carbon. So why would this kind of machshava not pasul the carbon according to Rabbi Yehuda? And so the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda l'taimei. Rabbi Yehuda follows his reasoning that we had elsewhere, and we had it before in Daf Lamed. The Amar ein dam mevatel dam, that when blood is mixed with other blood, because it's the same min, it does not become bottle. You could still spray it on the mizbeach, so it doesn't pasul the carbon. Now, the case that the Mishnah said, litin esanitanim lemaila lemata lemata lemaila, spray the blood on the mizbeach in the wrong location on the mizbeach, above, below, it's not where it's supposed to be. So why would this not pasul the carbon? So over here as well, Rabbi Yehuda l'taimei, Rabbi Yehuda follows his reasoning that we had in the Apedic before. The Omar, he says, Shaloi b'lemekaimai nami mekaima kirinebe. If you spray the blood on the mizbeach, anywhere on the location of the mizbeach, even if it's not its right place, it's like it was sprayed on its place, regarding the fact that it's machaper, that it atones. But the Gemara before said, though, that in such a case, you can't eat from the basar of the carbon. Usually when you spray in the mizbeach, that's matter not to eat from the meat, but because it was in its wrong place, it's possible you can't eat from it. But for the kapara itself of the carbon, it takes effect. So therefore, this kind of machshava will not pasul the carbon. Fragt the Gemara, v'lifloig b'nitanim b'fnim shenasnam b'chutz, how about regarding the case where a carbon is supposed to be sprayed outside mizbeach, and it was sprayed on the inside, and the same thing in the opposite? So why over here would Rabbi Yehuda not say that this should pasul the carbon? Right, so the Gemara is really, according to Rashi, asking the question specifically regarding a carbon chatos, that you brought the blood inside the Beis Hamikdash, where there the pasuk says that it passes the carbon. So in such a case, the blood of the carbon which becomes pasul, so it passes the carbon. So Rabbi Yehuda should agree that this kind of machshava should passel the carbon. As is the Gemara, Kesava Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds a point that was brought also in the Perek before, that be'inan, in order that this should passel the carbon, it has to be a place Makaim Shiyehei Mishulish Bedam Bebasa or Be'emurin. This only applies if it's a place that you thought that you're going to bring the blood there, that all these three, the blood of the carbon, the meat of the carbon, and the emurin, which are the parts that are brought in the mizbeach, it's a place where when you were able to be makriv on a bama, which is when there was no Beis Hamikdash, so then you were able to be makriv all these three in that place. And now, and when you can't be makriv on a bama, all these three cannot be brought there. That does not apply inside the Beis Hamikdash, because inside the Beis Hamikdash, the dam, there is dam that's brought inside the Beis Hamikdash to be sprayed on the inside mizbeach. You can't say that it's a place that all three cannot be brought there, since dam could be brought inside the Beis Hamikdash, and there could even the basar also. We had that before when the Gemara mentioned this. Tosfos says that basar, could you eat inside the Beis Hamikdash? In certain circumstances, you could eat inside the Beis Hamikdash. So in order for it to be a psul, it has to be now a place that all three of them cannot be brought there at all. And that's not the case with inside the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, this kind of machshava will not passel the carbon. And that includes, the chiddush over here is that this includes not only regarding shaloi bim kaimai, the machshava of shaloi bim kaimai, but b'chlal, when you get to this machshava to passel, that he thinks that the blood that's supposed to be sprayed outside, that it's going to be sprayed inside, that will not passel the carbon. Just like by shaloi bim kaimai, it doesn't qualify to passel, so the machshava here, it will not passel as well. Now the Gemara asks on this, so mi is Rabbi Yehuda hai svara. Does Rabbi Yehuda hold of this idea that the machshava shaloi bim kaimai has to be in a place, say outside the Azara or outside Yerushalayim, but not inside the Beis Hamikdash? Tanya, but in a brayso we learned, Rabbi Yehuda says, it says in the pasuk dovara. So in this pasuk, it actually speaks about not bringing a carbon with a mum. At the beginning of the pasuk there, it says ashiyah by mum, you shouldn't be makriv, and then it adds kol dovara. Another bad thing. What's another bad thing? It says Rabbi Yehuda riba kan chatos. It's coming to add a carbon chatos sheshachta bedarim, that he shechted it thinking, this does not mean that he actually shechted it bedarim, but he's shechting it thinking that it's going to be bedarim, or v'chatos shenichnas damo lifnim, or a carbon chatos that he's thinking, or one second, let me just be sure. I think actually when it says sheshachta bedarim, it means that he actually shechted it bedarim. Okay, that's regarding the shchita. He actually shechted it bedarim. And v'chatos shenichnas dama lifnim. And then the carbon chatos, that over here is speaking about thinking. That he's thinking while he's shechting it, that the blood is going to be brought inside the Beis Hamikdash. Psula. Then it'll be pasul. That pasuk, kol dovara, is speaking about the time of the shchita. Because at the beginning of that pasuk, it says loy sizbach. Right? So when it says over here, that it's chatos shenichnas dama lifnim, it's not speaking about actually bringing the blood inside, because we're speaking about the time of the shchita. So the dovara here is either he shechted in the wrong location, kachim, has to be shechted on the tzafon of the mizbeach, and he shechted it in darim, or he's thinking when he's shechting that he's going to bring the blood inside. That will passel the carbon. So it clearly says over here that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it does become passel. Not like the rule that we said before, that the only place that will passel is if you think you're going to bring it out to a place where all three, dam, basar, and emunim, are never supposed to be brought there. Even if he thinks he's going to bring it inside the Beis Hamikdash, it will passel the carbon. Now the Gemara asks, though, on the other hand, the opposite now. The Lesley, Rabbi Yehuda Shlishi. Does Rabbi Yehuda not hold of this drasha, which is actually learned out from the word Shlishi? That's how the Gemara darshans this. The word Shlishi means it has to be a place where all these three could not qualify there. Does Rabbi Yehuda not hold of this concept? But Vatna, we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, Hichnis b'shoigig kosher. If you brought in the blood that's not supposed to be brought inside the Beis Hamikdash, and it's brought inside, if it was done b'shoigig, it's kosher. But if it's brought inside b'mezid, then pasul. Then it does become pasul. Now, v'kai milon, we know that what did Rabbi Yehuda mean to say? That if the blood is brought inside, then the carbon becomes pasul. That's only b'sheh kippur. It's not enough that he brought it inside the Beis Hamikdash. Only if he actually sprayed it on the inside Mizbeach, or inside by the pareiches. Only when he actually sprayed it inside. That's when it becomes possible. But just being brought inside into the wrong location in the Beis Hamikdash, that will not passel it. So therefore, the Gemara says again.
How is it shogeg? Because does he not know that he's going in?
I guess he didn't realize that you're not supposed to bring it inside. He didn't know that it's usher to bring it inside. He didn't realize which carbon it is, that it's not supposed to be brought inside. Okay. Right? Okay, so now what do you see over here? When is the blood, if he brought it inside the Beis Hamikdash, going to be possible? Only if it was actually sprayed. Just bringing it inside, there's not possible. So now hashta, asam ayla, if he brought inside this blood, this word, ayli, he brought it inside, I say, ikipir in, ilay kipir loy. If he sprayed it, then it's going to passel the carbon, but if he did not spray it, just brought it inside, it's not going to passel the carbon. So hachal, what are we discussing here? When he has the thought about bringing it inside, when he's shechting the carbon. The chashuvi, he's just thinking about bringing it inside. Like kol shekain, definitely according to Rabbi Yehuda, that should not be enough to passel the carbon. So therefore here we see the opposite, that inside the Beis HaMikdash is not a location called Shaloi B'mkaimai to passel the carbon. Before we prove that Rabbi Yehuda holds that just bringing V'chata Shenichnas Damal Lefneim, Rabbi Yehuda says it's possible. That's what you learn from Dovara. So we have a contradiction here in the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. That says the Gemara, Trei Tanoi V'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. It's like two different Tanoim according to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion about this subject, whether bringing it inside, that machshavah to bring it inside the Beis HaMikdash will passel the carbon or not. Okay, now the Gemara asks another contradiction in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion from something that was brought up here in the Braise. So what did it say? That Dovara includes also that when you shecht, you should shecht on the tzafin, the north of the Mizbeach, the right place, not in the Dorim. Is it Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that if you shech the carbon in its wrong place on the Dorim, on the south of the Mizbeach, not on the north, that you would be chayiv malchus for this? That this is included in Dovara, and it says in that pasuk a lav that it should not be shechted like sizbach Dovara, that would be malchus for this. But Vatanya, it says in the Braise, Rabbi Yehuda says, Yochel, I would think that chatos sheshachta b'darim yechayiv. That if you shech the carbon chatos on the south of the Mizbeach, you would be chayiv malchus for this. Talmud loima. So the pasuk says, Leisizbach l'Hashem lekecha sher v'sev v'goyim, and the pasuk goes on that you should not shech the carbon if it has a mum. And what do I see from this pasuk? When it says kol dovara afterwards, kol dovara means al dovara atamachayvai. It has to be something which is a dovara. In what sense? So Rashi says dovara means similar to a blemish, which is open to see that it's something that is not whole with the carbon. Dovara means it's something despicable, that everyone could see that this animal is not in a good condition to be shechted. That's what you chayiv for. Al dovara atam chayiv. That's something that you chayiv malchus for. But v'i atam chayiv, but he will not be chayiv malchus for al chatos sheshachta b'darim if the actual physical behemoth itself is in perfect condition. He just changed its location. So Adarab, over here you see Rabbi Yehuda saying that the pasuk adds the word dovara to teach you that you should not be chayiv malchus for this. It has to be a dovara, something that's bad with the condition of the animal itself, similar to a mum. So again, the Gemara says, today Tanoi alibe de Rabbi Yehuda. These are two Tanoim according to Rabbi Yehuda, whether we are going to add from dovara to be chayiv malchus for this, or Adarab, from dovara we exclude to say that it has to be similar to a mum, and you will not be chayiv malchus for this.
On Daf before, he says two things over here about Yehuda. Yeah. And it says on the bottom also, half of the chashuv was like Holshkein.
Yeah.
This when it's happening now. The chashuv comes. The haniach is now.
Yeah,
the chashuv is later. There's no connection between these two things because now he wasn't haniach until later on.
Talking about the machshava though. We're talking about the machshava.
The machshava comes is on something. The svara, like I said, a keeper, like chashiv, the chashiva. If it was with keeper, it's good. What the chashiva have to do with it? If this is now, and the chashiva and the actual machshava is for later on. But now that takes place hours later.
Okay. Let's continue. I'm not 100%. Okay, let's finish the Indian. Let's finish.
The svara is not what the svara is.
Okay, Zakta Gemara. Omar Rab Abba. Rab Abba now says regarding Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that said that if you have the machshava that you're going to leave it, you're not going to do anything with it. You're going to leave the blood until tomorrow, or just leave it out of its place. That will passel the carbon. Now Rab Abba says about this, Umayde Rabbi Yehuda though will agree shechayzer v'koyvay lepigel. If after this, let's say he had that machshava to leave it when he's shechting, and the next avodah, when he's receiving the blood, then he has a machshava of pigel, that he's going to eat it out of its place, or out of its time. Then, or out of its time, which is what pigel is, then it will be established as pigel. What's the chiddush on what Rab Abba is saying? It says, we learned earlier in the Masechta, the halacha of pigel only applies if pigel is the exclusive machshava that he had to passel this carbon. If there's another machshava that he already had before that is passeling the carbon otherwise, then the pigel doesn't take effect. So nevertheless, Rab Abba is machadish that in this case, though, Rabbi Yehuda will be maida that even though he already had a machshava to leave it, afterwards, when he has another machshava of pigel, the machshava of pigel will take effect. Amar Rave, so now Rave says about this, Teida, I'll prove to you that what Rab Abba said is true, because you can say that you can see this by every single machshava of pigel, because the pigel lifnei zrike loy klumu. When a person has a machshava for pigel, for example, when he's shechting the carbon, he has a machshava that he's going to eat the carbon out of its time. Not until you actually sprayed the blood is there any pigel yet that took effect, because you have to actually finish doing all the avodas in order for pigel to take effect. That's the halacha by pigel. Only if you did all the other avodas properly until the end, which is after the zrika of the blood, then the pigel takes effect. So lifnei zrika loy klumu. Before the zrika, there is no pigel over here. So at that point, when he's thinking that he's going to spray the blood until tomorrow, it's not yet pigel. And included in that machshava that he's going to spray the blood tomorrow is a machshava that he's going to leave it until tomorrow. He's going to leave it until tomorrow, and there's no pigel yet that took effect. But then what happens? Then when he concludes the Aveda and he actually sprays the blood on this Be'ach, now the Kavala pigel. Now it becomes pigel. So I see over here, by every pigel, when he has the machshava for pigel, included in that machshava, even before it actually becomes pigel, is also a machshava to leave it until tomorrow. And so l'chayri, you already have a certain machshava of psul right there, even before he sprays the blood. And then when he completes and he sprays the blood, now it becomes pigel. So just like regarding this case, I see that there's a psul that's there in advance, and yet afterwards when he completes, it becomes pigel. The same thing when he has two different machshavas. When he has a machshava of psul, that he's going to leave it until tomorrow, and then afterwards he has a machshava of pigel, the machshava of pigel will take effect. That was the svar of Rava. So we could learn this from every single pigel. But on this, the Gemara says, V'loihi, you can't compare to every single pigel, because Hasam hu chadam machshavihi. Over there, by every pigel, there's only one thought. His thought is that he's going to spray the blood or eat it shalei bismanai. That's it. There's only one thought of pigel. Yet, true take included in that machshava, until he actually finishes and sprays the blood on the mizbeach, it's not yet pigel. You could look at it as a machshava that he's going to leave it until tomorrow, but it's just one machshava. Therefore, over there I say that once he sprays the blood, then pigel, the thought of pigel, takes effect. However, hacha trei machshavas. Over here, there's two different thoughts that the person had. When he shechted the carbon, he had a machshava that he's going to leave it until tomorrow. And then afterwards, when he was makabel the blood, he did the next aveda, then he had a different machshava of pigel. So maybe when it's two different machshavas, the machshava of pigel would not take effect. It's not an exclusive psul of pigel. Ravuna asks on Ababa's chiddush. Here he refutes actually what Rababa said, because it says in the Braisa, if when the Kohen did Aveda, he had a machshava that the blood that's supposed to be sprayed above the mizbeach, the high part he's going to spray below, or lamato lamaila, or the opposite, la'alter kosher. If he actually is thinking that he's going to do this right away, then the carbon is still going to be kosher. So because this machshava does not passel the carbon, so if after this he has now another thought when he does another aveda, chutz l'mekaymai, that he's going to eat it out of its place, pasul. The carbon becomes pasul, ve'en by kares, there's no kares, because that's always the halacha of a machshava chutz l'mekaymai, that there's no kares if you eat from the meat of this carbon. Chutz l'zmanoi, however, if he then thinks in another aveda that he's going to eat it out of its time, then pigul, a chayav and all of kares. It'll be full pigul and yechayev kares, because the previous machshava that he had did not pasul. So now it's exclusively pigul, and because it's exclusively pigul, it becomes pigul and yechayev kares. Now, if the Kayin was thinking when he did Aveda, Lamachar, that he's going to spray the blood tomorrow, then he's going to spray the blood tomorrow in its wrong place, pasul. Then the carbon will become pasul, and therefore, if Chazar, V'chishev, Ben Chutz L'zmanoi, Ben Chutz L'mekaymoi, if after that, besides this machshava, that he's going to spray the blood tomorrow in its wrong place, he also thinks that he's going to eat it out of its time or out of its place, pasul ve'ein by kares. Now it becomes pasul, and there will not be any kares for this. So over here, this is basically the exact same case that Rab Abba spoke about. When the Kayin thinks that tomorrow I'm going to spray the blood in its wrong place, it's the same like the machshava that Rabbi Yehuda was saying when the Kayin thinks that he's going to leave the blood until tomorrow. Because over here he's thinking that he's going to leave the blood until tomorrow, that he's not going to spray it in the right place. So therefore, he already had that machshava that he's going to leave the blood tomorrow. He's not going to spray it in its right place. So it becomes pasul already, because it already became pasul. If then in the next aveda he had another machshava of pigul, the pigul cannot take effect anymore. It's not exclusively pigul. To Yufta the Rab Abba, this refutes the point that Rab Abba says that when you had that machshava to leave it until tomorrow, and then afterwards you have the machshava of pigul, the pigul does take effect. To Yufta, this refutes the chiddush of Rab Abba. Omer Rav Chizde, Omer Ravine Bar Sila. Rav Chizde says the name of Ravine Bar Sila, Chishev sheyechlu tmeim. If when the carbon was shechted, he had the machshava that who's going to eat the carbon? Tmeim. People that are impure, they're going to eat the carbon lamachar tomorrow. So tmeim are not supposed to eat the carbon. So in such a case, chayiv. If afterwards you had a machshava of pigul, then you'll still be chayiv for this. Which means that this kind of machshava, that someone that's tomei is going to eat from it, is not a kind of machshava that passes the carbon, that then you're going to say that afterwards the machshava of pigul cannot take effect. No, it doesn't work like that. The machshava that someone that's tomei is going to eat from it, it's not a machshava that passes the carbon. So therefore a machshava of pigul afterwards will still take effect. You'll still be chayiv if you eat from that meat as a regular pigul. Omar Rave, so on this as well, Rave tried to prove the point that Rav Chizde said. So Rave says, Teida, I'll prove this to you. The basar lifnei zrike loy chazi. Any meat of a carbon, before you spray the blood on the mizbeach, because you didn't spray the blood yet, it's not fit to eat from it at all. V'chi mechashev bei mifsal. But yet, even though this is meat that's not fit to be eaten from it, when you have a machshava of pigul regarding this basar that you're going to eat it out of its time, the machshava of pigul takes effect. So just like regarding every pigul. So again, the point that Rav is trying to show you, you see this by every single pigul. Every pigul, you're having machshava when I'm spraying the blood on the mizbeach, or he's having the machshava when he's shechting, when he's receiving the blood. He's having machshava though, when? In a time period when the basar of the carbon is not right to eat yet. And yet the pigul takes effect. So if he has a machshava that someone that's tomei, that's not supposed to eat from it, is going to eat from it, that's not kind of a kind of machshava that could interfere with the pigul. The pigul will still take effect. That was the raya of Rave. But again, the Gemara says, Velohi, you can't prove this point from every single pigul, because Hasam, Zarek, Umerzi. True, the basar of the carbon before you spray the blood on the mizbeach is not yet fit to eat, but you could spray the blood, and then it becomes fit to eat. Here, though, he had a machshava that someone that's tomei will eat from it. That's not a person that's ever right to eat from the carbon. So maybe that kind of machshava, even though it doesn't pass the carbon, but maybe it could interfere with the machshava of pigul, that if it's not exclusively a machshava of pigul, it will not pass the carbon. So you can't compare to that. Third case, which is a different Indian, but also Rava tried to bring a proof in a similar kind of way. Amar Rav Chizde said another halacha. Margele b'pomi de Rav Dimi bar Chinina. Rav Dimi bar Chinina would say the following halacha: B'sar Pesach, the meat of the carbon Pesach shaloi hutzla, that was not roasted. It's supposed to be eaten only roasted, which means that this is a Karban Pesach that everything, all the stages of the Aveda was done properly. It was shechted, they sprayed the blood on the Mizbeach, they burnt on the Mizbeach, but then when it comes to eating it, it was not roasted properly. V'lachmei taida shaloi hormu, or the lachmei taida, the breads of the Karban taida that they did not separate for the kayin, the breads that the kayin is supposed to get. Out of the 40 breads, they're supposed to separate 4 of them, goes to the kayin. Chayavin aleyan mishum tumah. If someone that has tameh in his body, he is tameh and he eats from it, he's going to be chayev for eating from kachim when he's tameh. What's the chiddush in what Rav Chizda is saying here? Usually the halacha regarding one that's tameh that eats from the carbon to be chayev kares is only if you eat from the carbon in a stage where anyone else, it's roy for them to eat from it. For example, if someone that's tameh that eats from a carbon before the zrike, where nobody's allowed to eat from it yet, so then even a person that's tameh that eats from it, he's over and alav, but he's not going to be chayev kares. So over here, regarding these examples, Pesach was not roasted, or the carbon taida, the bread was not separated yet for the kayin, you may think, you're not supposed to eat it this way. So one that's tameh should not be chayev kares either. So no, but Rav Chizda said that in such a case, you will be chayev. It's not something in the actual kapara of the carbon itself that was not yet done. It's not like a case of lifnei zrika. Over here, it's a detail in how it's supposed to be eaten. Over here, someone that's tameh that eats from it will be chayev. So Rava says, I'll prove you this point. Teida, proof for this is the Tanya we learned in the Braise. It says in the pasuk, Asher Lashem. So in this pasuk is the pasuk where it speaks about someone that's tameh that eats from a carbon. Asher Lashem v'tumasei olav, and he's tameh. So v'nichasad, he's kares. So what do you learn out from Asher Lashem? L'Rabbi say murei kachim kalim l'tumeh. This comes to say that even the Asher Lashem, those parts of the carbon that you're supposed to burn on the mizbeach from the kachim kalim, that the person that's tameh ate from those parts of the carbon, he's going to be chayev kares for eating from the carbon that's tameh. Now, so what do you see from this? Alma, I see, even though these are parts of the carbon that are Lashem, it's supposed to be burnt on the Mizbeach. If someone that's tameh eats from it, he'll be chayev for eating from it when he's tameh. That's not like he didn't spray the blood yet. He sprayed the blood on the Mizbeach. It's a part of the carbon that's not intended for eating. It's supposed to be burnt on the Mizbeach. That as well will be tameh. The person that's tameh will be chayev kares. So Hanami, I could compare and say that the same is regarding these cases mentioned when the Pesach wasn't roasted properly, or the breads by the carbon taida was not separated properly yet. Avagav dolav benechilin, even though you're not supposed to eat from it in this way, you're not supposed to eat from it yet. Chayav alei mishum tumah. If someone that's tameh eats from it, he will be chayav. That was the comparison of Rava. But on this, the Gemara says, "V'loi," you can't compare because hasam imuri kachim kalim chazul gavaya. By the pieces of the carbon that's lashem that you're makriv on the mizbeach. True, a person's not supposed to eat from it, but it's already after the aveda of the carbon is done. You did the zrika already, and now it's fit for something. It's supposed to be brought on the mizbeach. There, you could say that the one that's tameh that eats from it will be chayev kares. However, over here in this case, you have the meat of the carbon pesach that was not roasted yet, or the breads of the taida that you didn't separate for the kayin. Nobody is supposed to be eating from this at all. So how do you know in such a case that someone that's tameh would be chayev if he eats from it? It has to be fit for something. It's not fit for anything yet. Or the Shnachrena, the same point, that Rava said, by emurin I see that it's not fit for eating, and still if the one that's tameh eats from it will be chayev kares. And we answer the same point, v'loyi, it's not the same thing. Hanach chazul imulsayu, the emurim is roy for something. It's supposed to be burnt on the mizbech, v'hani loy chazul klal. And over here though, the Pesach, or the taida that was not separated yet, the breads, is not fit for anyone to eat yet, and therefore one that's tameh in his guf, not necessarily will he be chayev when he eats from this. Hadron Allah, kol apsulim, we shall return to you the third Perek of Masechet Zevochim, Perek